Hey, it's Dr. Adam Nally coming to you this evening to talk a little bit about sugar and sugar addiction. I've had a lot of people ask me if sugar is truly addictive and why it's addictive and what happens, especially those that decide to go off the ketogenic diet for a day or two and cheat, or to have a cheat day or a cheat weekend or things of that nature. And so this is one of the things that people ask me all the time is it bad to cheat on a ketogenic diet? Can I have a cheat day? So what I want you to understand is there's a couple things that are essential in following a ketogenic diet. And if depending on how insulin resistant you are or how much overproduction of insulin you produce, because of the insulin resistance issue, and that plays a big role in how cheating may affect you. So the first thing I want you to understand is that when you're doing a ketogenic diet, you've lowered your carbohydrate to less than about 20 grams per day, and you're using fat and protein as your primary fuel. The second thing is that if you use glucose, glucose being a sugar, that'll enter the bloodstream and it actually raises the insulin and that kicks you out of the ketogenic state. But a lot of people say, well, what about these other sweeteners like fruit? Fruit's fine, right? Or they use alcohol or things like that. Well, let me show you what ends up happening here. If you look at the slide here, this is how fructose is metabolized. Now, 100% of glucose is metabolized in the body, where I should say 80%, about 20% of that glucose is actually metabolized in the liver. 100% of fructose is metabolized to the liver, and that fructose actually is converted into uric acid, number one, and fructose 1-phosphate, which is the second component of that. The uric acid, which is the cause of gout and kidney stones, goes up, and this is the driver behind gout and kidney stones. It's not the purines in the diet, it's the presence of fructose or alcohol that drives up this uric acid. That suppresses nitric oxide, which actually raises your blood pressure. So your blood pressure is fluxing significantly, not because of salt in your diet, but because of the presence of either fructose and or insulin affecting that blood pressure and affecting uric acid. Now, the interesting thing is, if we change slides here, that let's look at how alcohol is produced. Identically to fructose, alcohol is metabolized almost identically. Both fructose and alcohol actually produce an aldehyde. In this case, acetaldehyde, which is produced from the fructose, is a molecule or chemical that's hedonic, meaning what it does is it actually goes up to the brain and stimulates cravings in the brain anywhere from an hour to 3 hours later. So if you eat that donut, because of the fructose metabolism, you produce this acetaldehyde, and that aldehyde actually goes to the brain and says, ooh, that tastes really good, give me more. Similar with alcohol, same exact issue. This acetaldehyde actually stimulates the morphine receptor and causes those cravings within the ventral tegmental area of the brain. It actually stimulates an area that stimulates a dopamine release, makes you feel good, and then makes you crave it later. We're going to look at that here in a second. Now, uric acid increases gout, we talked about, increases the kidney stones. The uric acid and the fructose, as well as the alcohol, drive up triglyceride because of the presence of fructose 1-phosphate. And those two, either of them or together, increase leptin resistance issue through another pathway, which we won't go into right now, but it drives that process of suppressing your ability to control your hunger, and it increases the insulin resistance present in the liver, meaning it actually makes it harder and harder for insulin to act as a brake on the production of glucose from the liver, which is one of the reasons you see a rise in fasting blood sugar as a person eats lots of starch or sugars, because that's half of a sugar molecule is glucose, the other half of it is fructose. And so if you're producing this large amount of fructose that's or you're eating a large amount of fructose, that fructose, which has to be metabolized by the liver, is then causing these exciting side effects to arise, and that's the challenge that arises. Acetaldehyde goes to the brain, stimulates the nucleus accumbens, and through the ventral tegmental area and the prefrontal cortex stimulates tremendous cravings through the release of dopamine. Now, something that's fascinating to understand is that IV cocaine, amphetamine, or heroin also stimulate this area identically, and as you release this large amount of dopamine, it causes people to experience pleasure right as that dopamine is released. And so we know that that's the case. The fascinating thing here is that various stimuli will actually drive that process to occur. And I wanted to show you this here. This is called the mesolimbic system. And so anytime dopamine is released in that regard, you'll actually see it's a reward sensation. You get pleasure, you get euphoria, and you get this compulsion to preserve that feeling in the frontal cortex. When serotonin, through an opposite system, actually enhances mood, memory, sleep, and cognition. And so although there's some control of these two pathways, it's that dopaminergic pathway that causes the cravings to kick in. And the aldehyde produced from fructose or alcohol directly stimulates the frontal cortex with dopamine as it's there. Interestingly enough, whether you listen to music or you savor chocolate or you have something like that, this explosion of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens acts like a firecracker in that frontal cortex and is pretty powerful. I wanted to show you this here. This is just a CAT scan of an MRI of the brain showing these areas within the brain. And the red spot you can see here is the ventral tegmental area. This is the area that's stimulated directly by that aldehyde that's produced when your body metabolizes fructose or when it metabolizes alcohol. You can see that. I won't go. Some people call it the elixir of desire, and it's important to see that. What I wanted you to look at is that as they've done PET scans and MRI scans, looking at what happens to the brain of an amphetamine user versus a control and an obese subject versus a control, the interesting thing is that over time, because of the way the sugar affects the brain, there's a depression in the presence of dopamine receptors in both methamphetamine users and obese subjects that are almost identical. And what that essentially means is that in order for you to feel that euphoric feeling, you have to actually increase the amount of dopamine every time you're doing it. So what we find is that if a person who is addicted to sugar and is getting this dopamine release, over time as they gain weight, they have to eat more and more and more to get that same satiety, that same pleasurable feeling. And that's one of the drivers behind eating more frequently and eating larger volumes in order to get that pleasure sensation. Similarly, this is a PET scan looking to show that these are the presence of dopamine receptors in the obese individual versus the control, and you can see that in the controls they have a notably higher level of dopamine receptor in the brain versus those in the obese individual, that those dopamine receptors are much lower, and you've got to actually have a bigger stimulus of dopamine in order to get that to be effective. Lastly, what we know from a study back in 2008 is that intermittent sugar exposure actually increases the dependency that's present on this area, and it cross-sensitizes the brain to amphetamine and alcohol, and this is one of the reasons we think that you get binge eating. So not that if you cheat on your ketogenic diet are you going to become a binge eater, but what this is telling us is that as we gain weight, or if you are obese and you're using a ketogenic diet and you're doing it effectively, if you cheat, you're actually stimulating these hedonic and craving or addictive centers of the brain that will cause the cravings to last for some people, including myself, up to about 3 days. Where those cravings will linger because of the addictive effect on the ventral tegmental area, the frontal cortex of the brain, and these dopamine receptors. So it's important to understand that, and it's important to be aware of what that does. So I wanted you to understand that in my practice, what we do with patients is I tell them, if you're doing a ketogenic lifestyle, great. If you decide you're going to cheat because it's your birthday or it's a holiday or we're coming up on Cinco de Mayo and you decide to go out and drink alcohol, one of the things that's really important you to understand is that if you cheat, you're probably going to crave foods like starches and breads and sweets for upwards of 72 hours or 3 days because of the hedonic effect on the brain that sugar and fructose or even alcohol has in response to these cravings and the way it affects dopamine. The more obese you are, the more these cravings will be effective and the more challenging it is to get past them. I have a lot of people that do really well for a year and all of a sudden they fall off the wagon and they end up cheating. And I use the term fall off the wagon. I use it intentionally because falling off the wagon from sugar can be just as difficult as falling off the wagon from alcohol because they both affect the same receptors. They both have a cross-sensitization to morphine, amphetamine, and heroin in that regard. And so if you cheat, those cravings for some people can be so powerful and so immense that they have trouble getting back on the diet. So I usually recommend don't cheat. Now, do I cheat? Of course, anniversary or birthday, I will actually, I'll have chocolate one day here or there, depending on what I'm doing. But the first thing I look at is it worth 3 days of cravings? Because I know they'll be there. And if I'm stressed or I'm in a time period where I don't think my willpower is going to be strong enough for 3 days, then I don't do it. I have to decide, is it really truly worth cheating? And so I would encourage you to consider that as you look at, do I cheat on my ketogenic diet? Is it worth these hedonic or these powerful cravings that kick in? Because because sugar can truly be an addiction through this process of metabolizing of fructose in the liver, identical to alcohol, identical to some of these other very addictive drugs. So this is Dr. Nally coming to you. I hope this helps in regards to understanding why cravings can be so powerful, and whether you should cheat on a ketogenic diet. Check out my website at darkmuscles.com. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please feel free to share this video out with friends and neighbors and family, those that you think might benefit from it. You're welcome to embed it or share it on your website or whatever you need to do. But I think it's very important because I don't hear this talked about nearly enough amongst the ketogenic community. And it's important to understand that hormonally, fructose, which is one half of a sugar molecule, alcohol have a pretty powerful effect on a person's ability to maintain a ketogenic lifestyle. So again, subscribe if you haven't. If you like this, please click the like button, share it out with your friends. Feel free to share it on social media wherever you'd like to. And have a great night. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.